Hello, and welcome to the AIoTHub, previously known as the IoT North. As you might be aware, Paul's away at the moment. His job's changing, so he's off on his jollies all around the world. So you're just lumbered with me tonight. So I was in IoT London last week, met lots of lovely people at the meetup there. Must admit, I'm missing the face-to-face interaction, talking with people about IoT, but hopefully with this talk tonight, we're going to have lots of engagement and lots of people asking questions live. We're always looking for speakers. If you've got any talks you'd like to do for the AIoTHub, please get in touch with myself or via Meetup or our website, AIoTHub.co.uk. Or you can also sign up for any future talks that we have. We've got lots of talks coming up this year. I don't have any on the Meetup websites that you can sign up for just yet. I'm still waiting final details, but we're really close. So last year, I don't know if you're aware that Leeds has a tech festival, and there are 3 weeks of tech talks and over 100 different speakers in different venues across Leeds. It's the largest tech festival outside of London. And one of the speakers that I heard being raved about was Jacob. So say hello, Jacob.
Hi, everyone.
What are you going to talk to us about tonight?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, John. I'll be looking at wearables today. I'm presenting a talk called Gamechangers in Wearable Technology. So we'll be looking at wearables not only just as gadgets in the household, but also as high-value IoT nodes and how they generate continuous real-world data. So I'll be sort of going through a couple of case studies as well, and then a little bit about me and how this all links into intellectual property as well.
Fabulous. So I'll just add you to the screen and remove myself and let you get away with it. Thank you.
Hopefully you can see my screen now, John.
Yeah, can indeed. And you're presenting live.
Perfect. Well, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. As I just mentioned, I'll be talking today about wearable technology. I'll be talking about how it links with, consumer tech, as well as high-value IoT nodes. I'll be using a couple of brands, including Whoop, Aura, and Chorus as case studies, and then zoom out a little bit into the legal IP and market considerations. First, I just want to sort of go into a little bit on who I am and why I care about this space in particular. So I'm a patent attorney. I'm working in London, originally with an electronics background, working across our health and innovation medtech sector at my company. Most of my work sits at the intersection between, especially with wearables, between sensing, low power design, and data. So I see quite a lot about how product decisions, standards, and claim language impact commercial outcome. So I've been a patent attorney for nearly a decade now. For those who haven't worked with patent attorneys in the past, we help inventors and companies to protect their ideas. So we work together to help describe their invention in detail and then file the patent application. We then subsequently deal with patent examiners to try and take the patent application through to grant. So I myself have worked on various different wearables throughout the sector. This is largely because my original degree is in electronic engineering. So I work with, fields such as computing, electronics companies, and lots of software. So it's sort of a bit of a common misconception that software can't be protected with patents, but probably these days it's more software that's actually protected than hardware. I think I mentioned before I work in our health innovation and medtech sector, which covers everything from medical devices, biotechnology, and sports technology. And I personally love working on wearables because I love sports as well. So I try and work on as many sports and wearables applications as I can. that aside, I'll try and keep the legal and IP talk to a minimum during the presentation, but definitely happy to dive deeper into any IP questions you have later. Feel free to jump in as we go, or save it for a Q&A after the presentation. I'm happy either way. So let's just align on what we mean by wearable. So a wearable can be any body-worn or skin contact device capturing physiological or contextual signals. So think, heart rate, temperature, blood oxygen, motion, and the list just keeps on growing and growing. I guess that's different from things like, say, an AirTag, which are obviously great IoT examples, but they wouldn't probably be put into the wearables categories because they measure things, such as location, but they don't measure the actual person. So I think this distinction matters when we talk about things like data rights, safety, and other personal info. So here are just some of the familiar form factors we have today that anchor the wearables market. So top left, we've got the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. I mean, these are quite new to the market. I mean, I think these have been released in the past year or so, but already massive popularity with these glasses. Then just below that, the Apple Watch. Obviously, smartwatches are probably some of the biggest wearables in the market and definitely well known. And then probably some of on the right hand side, we've got some of the lesser known wearables, but still really important. We've got smart clothing up in the middle, which has sensors embedded in it. We also have a CGM there, which is a continuous glucose monitor, because these are really, really important these days for diabetics. Top right, we have an Oura ring, which I'll actually be discussing in more detail below. And then we have the Apple AirPods. I think it's the newest version. They actually now have sensors involved in them. And so we can sort of class those as a wearable now. So as we can see, like, wearables cover such a big span of the consumer tech market. We have wrist, ring, medical grade wearables, hearables. That's what we sort of class the AirPods there, as well as smart textiles, which is sort of is growing as a sector. But each of these could probably be mapped to an IoT pipeline, because we have on-body sensors to likely to be some sort of phone or other edge computing device, into the cloud, and then insights and action. So I probably wouldn't say that these behave ambiently. I mean, some of them have ambient technology inbuilt, ambient features. For example, the Oura ring on the top right actually can detect sleep of the user and then can sync in a more passive manner in order to reduce the power usage. The Apple Watch can also detect background health monitoring and go into like sleep modes, as well as, I'll talk about the Whoop later, but Whoop also has other ways to reduce power. But these are not ambient in the true sense, but ambient like user experiences. Just one thing to know, I'll actually touch more in detail on medical wearables later, because I think that's a really interesting sector. I've touched here on the CGM glucose monitor. I've actually been reading recently about some zero power glucose monitors that are in early stage research, and they're actually releasing some early prototypes now, I believe. And these hopefully will be genuine ambient devices that harvest energy from ambient Wi-Fi signals, radio signals, 5G, 6G, etc. Potentially without batteries. I mean, this would be excellent for those suffering with diabetes that use the sensors, because I've got friends that have these monitors. They can be a bit of a I think the battery life or the sensor life can be quite low. So you can be, the ones that are disposable, we can be talking 7 to 14 days, I've read, and some of the implantable ones maybe lasting up to 180 days. But still, if we could increase the battery life to to be truly ambient, then I think that's an excellent development that we should look out for in this space. And now on just a quick question about the market reality of wearables. So looking at watch brands that have the highest revenue in 2024, I'm a fan of mechanical watches myself, and so I didn't really have much doubt when I was thinking about this myself and thinking that Rolex would dominate this list, considering the prestige of the brand and how long it's been out there for. But equally, with the popularity of the Apple Watch, that also has to be into the question too. I mean, if you're walking through the streets of London or other big cities, you're probably not gonna walk through the streets without seeing an Apple Watch or some other smartwatch. So potentially it might not surprise you now to see this graph I've just put up, this chart with Apple leading the way, by multiple, I think, what is that, £3 billion dollars, sorry. So it's clear that wearables are really at the forefront of consumer tech at the moment. And smartwatches really dominate, I think, because they combine the connectivity, the sensing, and the daily utility. A trifecta of important features that people really value. That combination has turned a watch, such as a mechanical watch, into the highest revenue category leader, i.e. the Apple Watch. It's a signal of where consumers, they appreciate value when hardware, software, and services all together align. So yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting graphic. So soon I'll be sort of going into a case study of some important brands, I think, in the wearable space. Before that, I just want to share a quick quote that I read when I was researching some wearables recently. So it says that wearables are the most intimate and data-rich IoT nodes that we have today. And I sort of just want to keep that in mind as we move on to examine the case studies. First of all, Whoop. So I'm sure many of you will have come across a Whoop, or potentially have Whoops, or at least seen people wearing Whoops. Whoop's mission is to unlock performance and health span via continuous insights. And this has grown from being founded in Boston in 2012 to being a massive company. This is expected to have value of nearly $4 billion, in such a small amount of time, in 12, 13, 14 years. I mean, that is exceptional, with estimated revenue of about $750 million last year. So we're talking about a massive company that sort of sprung out of nowhere into this wearable sector. So this is the Whoop band up in the top right hand corner. You can see it, and then that links to a Whoop app that you have on your phone. So the hardware is in the band, and then also the software is another sort of key feature of the Whoop. So the Whoop itself doesn't actually have a screen; it's just a band that you have to contact your skin. You can put it on. You can wear it on your wrist. You can wear it. I think you can wear it around your chest with a special strap, or your ankle. You also have to pay a monthly subscription to use it, so you don't just buy the device and then have access to it. You have to pay month on month on month. Why is that so popular? If we compare to, say, an Apple Watch, which we all know is loved by consumers, obviously has the big beautiful screen. You can see lots of data on it, and also you just pay the lump sum of the device, and you can use it for as long as you want. How has Whoop come in and completely gone for the opposite of that almost? Well, I think this is because of where they've targeted themselves in the market position. They very much go for, this is targeted at professional athletes, or those who see themselves as being, very serious about their sports or their training. So they allow you to have the device, the actual hardware device, for free, and then you pay for access to the subscription to the software which you need to work with the device. You know, you can't just have the device on its own. They sort of work in tandem. So think of Whoop as like a continuous physiological IoT node. The sensors feed edge inference on the phone and the machine learning in the cloud for strain and recovery models, which they run on their software, which you then see on your device. You know, it can track your sleep and other analytics. You know, it seems more and more people love to track their sleep these days, and Whoop is definitely one that helps with that. I think another reason for its popularity is sometimes the screen time can, you know, reduce distractions. You know, it increases wear time. Whoop is designed to be worn at all times. And by having a device that has less distraction, increasing wear time, you know, this is quite like an underrated metric in wearables, I would say. And yes, they do invest in intellectual property. The publication volume is rising. I wouldn't be a patent attorney without adding in a couple of patent-related graphics, so you'll have to excuse me on that. But you see, ever since they've founded, you know, the numbers have grown and grown and grown over time. So IP, of course, does help to you know, to increase their value and to make sure that competitors don't come in and take the ideas that they've worked hard in R&D to design. So let's switch form factor a little bit and move on to Aura. So Aura Ring is another really, really exciting company founded out of Finland. So we can see up in the top in the top right, we have two of their devices there, and they have also grown massively since they've started. You know, in the last 10 years. So I popped a couple of figures on screen. You know, initial £2.3 million dollars in seed funding, and then grown and grown from there after being at the Slush Tech conference in 2017, which is a great conference if you haven't been, by the way. And then more recently, with a couple more funding rounds, they're now, you know, I think I've what we put there, so $5.2 billion of approximate value. So not on the same level as Whoop, but equally, you know, it's still a massive company. And Aura, as I was just talking about Whoop, the hardware side of things is probably, yeah, you know, in comparison to hardware-based software, Aura Ring are really putting their money into the hardware. So they've managed to fit all their sensors down into such a small form factor that it can fit in the inside of a ring. Some of you might have seen these or might own an Aura Ring. It's actually quite impressive how much hardware they can fit into such a small form factor. And so, you know, that can also provide you the sleep data, the heart rate, the temperature, but also in a jewelry form factor. So, you know, those that might, you know, value the look of a product, you know, over something like a Whoop, which is a bit of a larger form factor. You know, this is a bit more discreet, for sure. So to be able to fit something within the size of a ring is no easy thing to achieve. And so similar to Whoop, they've also invested quite heavily into their patent portfolio to make sure that they keep their market share. I think at the moment they're around the sort of 50% mark in market share. And of course, they'll want to make sure that they stay there. Because as soon as the popularity of the Aura Ring has happened, you know, more and more companies are also trying to enter the, you know, the smart ring market. So in a sort of difference to Whoop, the core technology here is probably the hardware. We have this suite of sensors integrated into a ring. And this is for people that really value the, you know, discreteness of a ring. Sometimes people might not even realize this is a wearable and is actually could just be a, you know, a fashion ring or a wedding ring. So, you know, they're sort of in a different market position to say the likes of Whoop. So I'm just going to move on to a quick lawsuit.
Jacob, could I just cut in there? So Evan5643 seems to be excited to hear from other solicitors' thoughts on wearables. And he's asking the question, do you predict the EU's Data Act impacting the risk profile for connected products or related services companies?
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. However, I do think that data privacy is definitely important with this, especially when we're talking about all of this data, is potentially moving towards medical data. I think there's a sort of a fine line between, someone's heart, potentially heart rate, temperature, but then if we're moving into things like blood pressure, other sort of more personalized medical information, how is this going to be shared, and how is people's privacy going to be protected in this regard, especially if all this information is just being transmitted to your device and then to the cloud. There's a lot of trust going on when people are wearing these devices, because if you're wearing an Oura ring or you're wearing a Whoop, you are hoping that the company that you are is seeing all your data is being treated according to the laws of the country or the region, EU laws, etc. So I think, especially as we get towards the difference between medical and I can't remember the word of it. So Whoop has actually been involved in a couple of I'm not sure if they're lawsuits yet, but I think it's the FDA or someone. It's one of the US sectors have asked them to sort of take out some of the features of their product because they are medical. So I think Whoop currently get around it they call it's almost like a lifestyle metric rather than a medical metric. But then I think they've been trying to add in blood pressure or something similar, and it's sort of we're towing the line between, is this medical or is this lifestyle? And I think that'll be something that we're not going to see. This is the early stages of it, because we're only going to get more and more features from these wearables, more and more sensors, and people like this data. People want to see their sleep information. People want to see, their heart rate and blood O2. So it will be interesting to see whether regulation does halt that slightly, because I do think people will invariably trust the information that comes from their devices. If your Whoop or your Oura Ring tells you your blood pressure and they say it's healthy, maybe that would stop you from going to see the doctor. So I think regulation will shape this market for sure. Hopefully that helped to answer that question. Feel free to add something else at the end if I've missed something. So that leads on, I guess, to a recent lawsuit that Oura Ring was involved in. So as I mentioned earlier, they have about 50% of the market share. Thankfully, their IP strategy has been really strong from the start, and so they have been protecting their innovations with US patents, other European patents, and the like. And so they were actually involved against an Indian and Chinese company quite recently for infringing one of their patents. And thankfully for Oura, in the US, their patent was found to be valid and infringed by both of this Indian and Chinese companies. So, it's patent lawsuits like this that show the value to companies like Oura, so that copycats don't come in and take their ideas. So I'm now just going to move into another company that I admire, and that is Coros. So Coros is probably a bit smaller than, or it definitely is smaller than Whoop and Oura. But it was founded around the similar sort of time, now based in California, but originally from China. So their motto is Coros products combine high-grade hardware with innovative technology to provide endurance athletes with the gear they rely on in the world's most extreme environments. So with Coros, they're very much about these sort of extreme sports and adventurers and long distance runners. I'm sure I'm talking to a lot of runners in the room. Everyone loves running these days. It's since COVID, it's been probably one of the largest growing sports around. And people have invariably got bored of running marathons, and now it seems to be, it's ultra marathons, it's climbing Everest, it's this. And Coros have really tailored their products to these endurance athletes. So I think I mentioned here they've had partnerships with Kipchoge, one of the best runners of all time, and even though their estimated annual revenue there is between $25 and $50 million, that's still, even though it's less than the other two wearables brands I mentioned, it's still, a massive company, and it's only growing. This is some of their advertising marketing, and you can sort of see, they're really trying to go in on that, that adventure, that endurance athlete. So they're hitting a different, trying to hit a different target market than say Whoop. So even though Whoop is targeting, the so-called professional athletes or people that take their fitness really seriously, it's not designed to be taken up Everest. It's not going to last you. Look at down here. They're saying that this might last for 22 days. So they're hitting different markets, and consumers these days, they seem to like to target the niche product. They don't want the generalized brand that does everything. If you're a runner, for example, people are moving away from the Nikes and Adidas's, and they want the Hoka shoes. They want Salomons if they're long distance runners, like off-road runners. People like to have a brand that sort of really fits their mold. And so these three that I've mentioned here, they each fit nicely into their own niche. And because of that, I think that's really helped their growth in the area and in their markets. So Coros, they really focus on these rugged smartwatches. The battery tech in Coros is really interesting because it allows them to last a lot longer than typical smartwatches. I'm sure I'm talking to some people here that have Apple Watches, and people's gripes is that they have to charge them every day. So I think, especially if we try and move towards, as I sort of touched on it earlier about these being IoT nodes, but they're not really ambient. We're having to charge them very, very often. I think the closer we can get to ambient, even if it's ambient, sometimes battery operated, other times, it's still going to really help. And especially something like Coros, when they're targeting these endurance athletes, these super long distance runs and hikes and climbing up mountains, being able to have a battery life that's lasting close to a month is necessary, or if it's able to harvest energy from elsewhere as well. So Coros is another really interesting one. So now I'll sort of go into a little bit more detail about how wearables and IoT really converge. So wearables, as I mentioned earlier, are very much sort of high value IoT nodes. They're extremely data rich. Often they're being worn all day, every day by people, especially when we're talking about devices like Whoop and Aura. These are designed to be worn at all times, so they're constantly sensing the body. So things like these smart rings, watches, and whatnot, they're all then communicating with potentially with beacons or likely phones, and then going up into the cloud before actions being performed. So I mean, they can be used as such a rich net of devices, especially when we're talking about ones that have we'll call them lifestyle for now. We have the lifestyle heart rates, the temperatures, the blood O2s. These can be all used as rich data sets to try and predict potential patterns in the users. I guess But then when we have that comparison between a large data set, as we sort of touched on earlier, we do need to be careful about data privacy as well. And I think that'll be even more so important when we're talking about medical data. When we think of layers in these sensors, wearables can be considered trusted anchors and near body elements such as the smart clothing. And then we also move into environmental sensors and ambient tags. So we're moving from device centric to environment centric sensing. And this also sort of links to standards and protocols like I think I mentioned a couple here, like Bluetooth standards and whatnot, and how can we utilize these in order to reduce the power usage of these devices. If we have a device like Coros, which can last 23 days, this is completely different to, say an Apple Watch or a Whoop, which is only lasting a day or two. So why this matters, I think as we get more accurate insights than a single device can provide on its own, I think this will be helpful to potentially reduce the user burden, because it might be that the devices itself can perform less sensing itself in order to save power. So it's based on the network as a whole rather than just device to device. And I think this helps with new applications such as health monitoring and potential real-time safety. I think quite a few devices now, I know for Apple Watches, for example, can give you specific alerts when it thinks maybe your heart rate's too high or things that it's sensing is changing. So potentially these improvements and these networks can be life-saving when we talk about these IoT nodes and the wearables acting in a sort of a medical environment. And this sort of leads me on into my next slide here. So these modern wearables, because they're continuously capturing your signals, heart rate, sleep staging, skin temperature, these really can be used to be generating massive data sets. And can these be used for potentially for clinical monitoring tools? When I gave this talk, John mentioned me talking about this at Leeds Festival. We had someone in there from the NHS actually, and we had a really interesting talk about how could this potentially be used to, save on time and help build up an insight of a patient potentially based on their wearable. Would it be feasible or to implement you linking, say, let's talk about the UK, for example, let's talk about the NHS. Would it be feasible to link someone's Apple Watch, their Whoop, to their NHS number so that we can see, if they came in with, a high heart rate, is that normal for them? Has this changed over time? And could this be used then as a network of everyone in the UK wearing their devices? Could this be used to build up a better picture of, is the population healthy? Are things changing? Could this be used as a big data set to potentially make a healthier society? I mean, one thing that me and this audience member discussed was, this is potentially would cost a lot of money. Would the NHS be able to implement this? How long would it take if this was to be done? And then also we then have the issues of the privacy of the data, especially when it comes to most of these wearables we're wearing. These are private companies. They own that data themselves. So I don't think it would be easy for those data sets to be used for clinical monitoring tools. But equally, if we could in the future, I think that would be, something to aim for sure, because we've got so much information here. Could these be used for early signs of illness, infection? I put overtraining there as well. I mean, that's, potentially not as, important as early signs of illness, but, this is such a rich data set that, can we be using it to identify infections, sleep disorders, cardiovascular anomalies? Because especially now, a lot of your devices will be able to measure heart rate at least, but equally other more detailed things as well. I think some of them can do ECGs now as well. They can do electrocardiograms as well. So things that maybe 20 or 30 years ago might have had to be done in a hospital, they can now be done in your wrist at all times. I think these wearables really will have a big impact on people's lives moving forward. So I think the learnings that I'm taking from looking at, for example, case studies such as these, are that people are looking to these specialist brands to address their needs. People, not that brands like Nike and Adidas, the general sports brands, are diminishing anyway, but people are looking to the specialist brands. If you're a specialist swimmer, you look to your Speedo. If you're a runner now, you might look to Hoka or other brands. And now you're looking to things like Whoop for your personal insights. And I think that's only going to increase. People feel like, as consumers want to feel like the brand they're buying their device from really knows what they need. If I'm going to try a 100-kilometer run, I understand that Coros knows what I need for that run, and their product's going to provide that for me. And on the IoT angle, wearables are fast becoming, human-centric IoT nodes that are feeding larger systems and potentially ambient systems in the future. At the moment, most wearables are needing to be charged, on a daily basis, weekly basis. So I don't think we really have much ambient, ambient devices so far. But as I touched on earlier, we are seeing potentially some ambient devices in the continuous glucose monitoring devices. So if we're seeing developments in those sort of wearables, potentially we could see other ambient devices potentially being developed in the future. So R&D continues to drive this innovation, and that sort of leads into protected IP being very important for these companies to make sure that, the R&D that they're putting in, that time and effort they're putting in, isn't going to be, copied a couple of years down the line by someone else. So, brands like Whoop, Coros and Aura are making sure that they protect heavily in their IP, and that's helping to improve their value. So yeah, I hope this has been interesting, and please let me know if anyone has any questions at all about anything.
That's great, Jacob. Yeah, please put your questions in the chat and we'll ask Jacob live. It's fascinating because we had a speaker who'd written a book on how the IoT market had sort of underwhelmed and hadn't met its expectations. But if you consider consumables, there's clearly a vast amount of money going into that, and they're very successful as IoT devices. And I include my Garmin watch as an IoT device because all the data goes on the internet.
Yes,
somewhere, you can actually redirect that data to wherever you like, because you can put it in Strava or whatever trackers you want. So
I think if you spoke to people on the street, if you said, do you have an IoT node, they might not, know what you mean, but equally people, have so many IoT nodes on them, your phones, your devices. I think the wearables market particularly is only going to grow and grow. People love data, especially about themselves. I'm one of them. Having your smartwatch tell you, how well you slept the night before, or how well you've recovered from a long run. It's interesting, and people like to have these insights.
I admit my Garmin rules my life. it tells me I need to work harder.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something that's sort of come out of nowhere, and these companies that I highlighted today, they're only been around for 10 years or so, which is still quite, they're in the infancy, and they can already be household names. Whoop, for example. I mean, I've probably said Whoop about a million times. They're targeting professional athletes everywhere. I mean, if you haven't seen them before, maybe keep an eye out now. You'll see them, like, for example, Rory McIlroy, the golfer, wears one. Quite a few basketball players, if anyone watches the NBA, they wear them. And especially in non-contact sports, because then they can wear them while they play. So, if you're a professional footballer, I don't think you're allowed to wear anything on your wrists, any jewelry or anything on your arms. But but if you're a golfer, you can wear it. You can wear the Whoop at all times. So yeah, keep your eye out, because they are really heavily investing in sponsorships and partnerships with players. And then they also then use their data. Interestingly enough, they then use their data as sort of another way to market their product. So let's talk about Rory McIlroy again. I think when he won the Masters, they posted his sleep score index, or his like peak heart rate during the round, and they were using that on their Instagrams and Twitters as marketing tools. And it was really interesting to see, like, you have this extra insight into an athlete that you probably wouldn't have before. I'm sure they have some agreements that allow them to share their personal insights and their personal data.
Interestingly, I went to a talk by Lizzie Deanan, the Olympic cyclist, this morning, and she says everything is data driven now. All the Olympic athletes are training, and it's data.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I'm quite interested in is these. You've probably seen that they're like these pucks that professional athletes wear in their clothing. So if you're watching the England rugby team, they wear them. It's sort of in the small of their back at the top of their shirt. Footballers will often wear them in these, like, sort of like almost like a sports bra, and they wear those underneath their shirts. And these are wearables that, similar to a Whoop or other things, they track all of their movement during the game or during the training. And then they use those data insights to see, has that player run enough? What was their heart rate like? Do they need to get into the gym more? And they're using all these insights now to develop their tactics and develop their training plans and whatnot, and make sure the players aren't being overtrained. So yeah, I completely echo that. It seems in the professional sports markets, they're extremely reliant on data insights these days to push performance to the next level. And so it'll be interesting to see whether that's. Sorry, John. No.
We've had a few people check in from the north of England and Scotland just to say hi. Mike McSherry says £27 a month is one of the most expensive subscriptions, but the data insights fantastic. He's a Whoop subscriber.
Yes. So it is quite expensive, and I think it divides people with the subscription based model, because typically before this, I think everyone is accustomed to paying for their device in a one-off payment, and then they have access to it for as long as they want going forward. And so then to switch to a subscription model, which is probably arguably better for the company, because they know how much revenue they're getting in month to month. I think that can really divide people as to whether they want to have, another subscription to the list, of Netflix, Disney Plus, and now they've got to pay for their Whoop as well. But equally, I guess it's nice sometimes not have to fork out, a big one-off sum in the first place. But, I mean, it's clearly working. I mean, I had the figures up on screen earlier. I mean, Whoop's turnovers year on year are just skyrocketing. So people are obviously happy to pay that to get the good product. I mean, their software is very slick. It's almost Apple-like in terms of its UI is really easy to use. The graphics are excellent, and I think because because they give you the new devices with the new sensors as and when they come out. I think people feel almost like they are professional athletes because they're getting this level of insight that they wouldn't normally get. I think that's why it's really taken off.
Okay, one final question, unless we get any more from the audience. So we've had a good state of the market. Where do you see things changing and developing? And is there anything big on the horizon that we should know about?
Interesting question. Thank you very much. I mean, I touched on it with the glucose monitor, with that sort of trying to move into the ambient IoT market with their device, which of what I've seen is still early stage, but obviously extremely promising. I think for a device such as that, ambient seems feasible because there's less going on, and it's obviously only measuring blood glucose level compared to something like a Whoop or an Apple Watch, which is measuring a lot more, has a lot more sensors in the hardware, and is going to need a lot more power. But I think as battery tech improves, I think that will also massively affect the wearables market, because that will allow so many more features to be achieved. So I mean, the battery, in a different sector, if we're talking about EV cars, we're going through massive innovation in that field. It was only 5 years ago that you'd be charging your car. We're talking in almost tens of hours up to full charge, but then new EVs being released can have a full charge in almost 20 minutes, half an hour. The battery tech is increasing
and
at such a rate.
It's not as big as people have expected. So I think they did a big survey, and it was like 1% a year. I love my EV.
Yeah, and say like the research and development going into battery tech right now, is massive. And even though that's sort of being focused on EV cars, that will hopefully, as with most things in tech, that is miniaturized down into these wearable devices. And if you're able to have much more power efficient devices or batteries that have a lot higher capacity, I think that's going to unlock a lot more features in these wearable devices. We're still quite early stage in the sort of the Meta, the Quest, the headsets, with the VR over displays. But I think if we see that battery tech that's being used in cars successfully miniaturized into these big displays, then I think we'll see some real innovation and growth in those sectors. I mean, already, I think the problem people have with, say, that the Oculus Rifts and the Meta Quest headsets is they're quite big, they're quite bulky. People don't want to be potentially walking down the street in those devices, and already we're seeing the Ray-Ban Metas, that almost just look like a normal sunglass, don't they, in terms of sizing. If the battery life can improve in those and the overlays into the lenses, I think those will see some real growth.
We've had one final question from Ed and Shoulders. I think that's meant to be Head and Shoulders. You were saying about the importance of IP. Do you have any views on how the open source community might contribute to wearables?
Interesting. I mean, I personally don't deal with open source too much because, as I explained earlier, was sort of my job as a whole is to help inventors protect their ideas with patents. But equally, open source definitely helps when it comes to protocols and other standards. I mean, maybe less so standards, but I think when we have universal, obviously we're now pretty much there with USB-C being there for everything. But I think if we can open source more protocols for communications, potentially we could save on R&D costs there if everyone sort of uses the same protocols for communicating. I mean, most of it is Bluetooth, I believe, at the moment, between these within these wearable devices, because they usually just connect to your phone. So yeah, I guess it would be very helpful if the open source community could contribute and it be adopted by everyone. But typically companies, Apple being infamous for it, they like to try and use their own proprietary tech to try and get ahead in the market and then sort of keep people in.
Sorry, should have been turning on that. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. It's always good to have open source, but I'm not sure on that one, to be honest. But thank you for the question.
Cool. And we'll call it there. Thank you very much, Jacob. If you want to keep abreast of future meetups, there's definitely some in the pipeline. Sign up on AIoTHub.co.uk. If you've got any ideas for talks you'd like to give, please get in contact on the same website to either Paul or myself. Now I'm going to attempt to press the right buttons and make this end in hang on a sec.